World Regions Geography 110, East Asia, Part 6. China's one-child policy. What we have here is an uneven ratio of male to female. When you look right here, normal ratios, boys, girls, you see the Chinese ratio substantially different. And the reason is female infanticide. The long-term impacts of that is a decreasing population and less potential mates, which means these guys here are going to have to go out and find women somewhere else, and that could be a problem. Whether they have the money to do it or not. And long term, this is a shortage of younger workers. What you see here is a decrease in the number. This one-child policy started in 1980 and put baby brakes somewhat on population growth. If you look right here, you see the beginning of the one-child policy. Population's going, boom, 1980 starts to slow down, continuing to decline. You see the fertility rate. China's fertility rate is stabilized down here, but it's substantially below where it was. And what that means long term is a decreasing population. And if you think about it in economic terms, what it means is the ability that you're going to end up at some point with a few younger workers supporting a lot of older non-working Chinese, and that's going to put a strain on the social fabric. I mean, the United States is facing that. Western Europe is certainly facing that. The United States much less so, because our population is still growing. But the other part of that is that when you start having older people consume less than younger people, they're not having children, they're not buying houses, they already have them, so they consume less, and consequently your economy shrinks. You have less productive people, more less productive people. In other words, older people who aren't working are less productive. Therefore, there's more of them. They're consuming less. Your economy begins to shrink. And what that means long term for China is hard to say at this point, except that I wouldn't expect their economy to continue to grow. I expect it, if I was going to predict, I expect a Chinese collapse. The economy is overinflated. The housing, they built all those cities, nobody's living in them. That has blown up the GDP numbers, but really hasn't contributed to the economy. Future geographies. Chinese gross domestic product. Now you see here, boom, downturn there in global economy, continuing to rise, shot up here. This is the decrease. This is why China bought U.S. debt, to stop this plummeting, because they're export driven. If they didn't buy it, their economy was going to collapse. It has recovered, but as you see, unlike our economy that's still growing, theirs is beginning to slow dramatically. And a lot of economists believe that even these numbers from here to here, may be overstated by 2 or 3% per year, which is a substantial difference. China has done some good things in terms of getting emissions under control. You're seeing a steady decrease, but as we saw earlier, you still have significant issues with pollution, and it's impacting us, but it's even having a more devastating effect in China, and they don't even know what the long-term effects are going to be of the severe pollution. You have a lot of heavy metals. My friend Paul Zhuang, who is an agronomist from China, has told me that if you're within 50 to 70 miles of any major Chinese city, the soil has so many heavy metals from emissions from manufacturing operations that food grown in that region is not safe to eat. He said in this country they would be a Superfund site, but it's the whole eastern third of the country in China, and that's where all the population is. So I think long term for China, you're going to see a dramatic increase in health issues. You're going to see a dramatic increase in lung disease, in cancers, and in other health issues. I think you're going to see long-term productivity drop significantly. A lot of economists predict by 2030, China will be a net importer of labor. Otherwise, their economy, their production is going to drop dramatically because they don't have the population to support the industries that they currently have. Now, this is a breakdown of urbanization. These are the total number of population in these different regions. Now, what you see here, the light tan is living in an urban area, but they're registered. Now, in China, if you're born in a rural area, you get registered to a rural area. You cannot legally move to a city without government approval. So you're supposed to stay in the rural area, but there's no opportunity in the rural area. So people naturally migrate to the cities. They're basically illegal immigrants with migrants within the country. This tan is the registered urban, and this is the rural living where they're registered. What you see out here in the far west, it is people pretty much are living, if they're registered in the city, they're living in the city. If they're registered in the rural area, as you go into Tibet, you have a little bit here. Small percentage of the population is living in urban that are actually registered as rural. Here a little bit more, but as you move into this region, significant numbers of the population. And when you get over in here, it's interesting, almost all of the population is urban, even though this is registered as rural. So, you have dramatic differences, and it's that dramatic difference, that migration into where the jobs are, that is probably going to end up having some issues for China long term. Their goal is to move supposedly 250 million of these people currently living in the rural area into these urban cities that they've created that no one's living in. They haven't determined yet how, and the idea was to increase consumption, and so that would change the economy from an export-driven economy to a domestic consumption economy, much like the U.S., and therefore would be better long term and make the economy more stable and less susceptible to disruptions. The problem is, how are they going to support those people? Because there's not the jobs in those cities. Those are simply cities with housing, and their idea is that people are going to move in there. The government's going to guarantee them a wage, and but what are they going to do? I think it's a great idea, but I don't see it working. So this is some of the long-term issues that China is going to be facing.